Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is Jimmy Beach again with Exposure Software. We're going to have a fun webinar today. We're going to turn some portraits into stunning black and white images in Exposure. So feel free to ask any questions during the demo. We will be monitoring the chat, and I'm going to open that just so that I can make sure and read all of the chat for when you guys type. Okay, so feel free to ask any questions. If I don't answer the questions during the presentation, I will get to it in the Q&A at the end. Sometimes those questions are a little technical, and I don't want to stop in the middle of my demo. So we'll make sure and take care of that there. Okay, so Exposure 6, that's what we'll be using today. This is the latest version of our advanced non-destructive raw photo editor and organizer. Exposure handles your full post-processing workflow in both color and black and white photography, as we'll show you in this lesson. So just a little bit of history about Exposure before we begin is that it began as a plugin for Adobe Photoshop way back in the day. About 15 years ago, I'd say. It was developed to help film photographers transition from working in the dark room with chemistry, film, and enlargers to capturing and editing photos digitally. The accurate film emulation presets in Exposure. Let's talk about black and white conversion. So these images are from Barbara McFerrin. She is a really talented portrait photographer in Boulder, Colorado. And she sent these over. Now, so this image in particular, she edited for a color look. This is a finished image, okay? So typically, you will edit an image a little bit different if you're going to intend to make it into a monochrome shot or if you're going to make it a color shot. So I just wanted to point that out because sometimes it's a little weird if I say one thing and I'm showing you a color image. So first thing that we do before we convert our images to black and white is that we want to apply any basic edits to the color version. Now, this image, again, was already processed, so if I apply automatic edits or basic edits right now, which would be the quick way to edit, it actually probably won't look as rich as it does right now before we go to apply the conversion. So let's skip that step right now, and then we can show you a comparison as to why we don't want to skip that step, okay? So here on our first layer, we're going to go to the black and white film presets in Exposure. It's going to be the easiest way for us to access and control the conversion. So I'll click black and white here at the top of the presets panel. And Exposure has a huge library of great looking presets. So you can get right to work making the conversion right here. So, and you can always customize all of these looks by hand as well, which we'll show you. Okay, so the black and white films emulation come in a few different flavors. And as you hover over them, you can see them on the image. Now, these in this black and white films category work great on, well, really all kinds of images, but let's say that these black and white films category would work on landscapes or a standard wedding shot, anything like that. Portraits usually benefit more from a low contrast variety of these black and white film looks, which are identical to the ones that are in, black and white films. They're the same name, they're the same preset, they just have a lower amount of contrast in them so that they don't, add a lot of texture or anything like that to the skin. So, okay, so actually let's take a deeper look here because I've explained that kind of thing before. So on this image in particular, right, we want to, I love the way that the skin looks. It's super crisp and clean. There's not a thing wrong with it. I mean, this is an angel. So these black and white films, low contrast looks look pretty good. I'll select Agfa APX 25. And then let's zoom in here and we can see where the shadows are and we can see where these midtones are in the skin. It looks really nice, but it is a touch flat, okay? So the low contrast version of this preset is a little bit flatter than the original version. So if I click that one, we can see it's a little darker. Let me go back. See it? Now, I like the contrast in this look, but I like how much I'm not losing in the highlights and shadows in this low contrast look. Okay? So we're going to be using this is why I want to make adjustments before I actually make the conversion, because when I didn't make any edits to it, we want to go with the low contrast look. That's the better option. However, I want to make those edits to this original image first, and then I'll apply the regular black and white films preset, which has a little bit more depth, a little bit more contrast, and that is a better look in my opinion. Well, for this image, I've tried it a couple different ways. Okay, so I'm going to reset, and then just like I suggested, I'm going to make some auto adjustments to the image just to punch it up, warm it up a little bit, and set it really to a, let's say, minimally processed or neutral look. That's really where you want to get your image before you go to apply any of the presets and exposure. It gives you the most accurate simulation of those presets themselves. So now that I've applied these basic edits, we can see them here on the basic panel, just a little bit here, the highlights and shadows, and a little to exposure. I'm going to rename this layer just so that I know what I'm doing, and I applied basic edits to that layer. Now I'm going to apply the APX25 preset that I liked, but I'll right click and I'll apply it new layer with preset, which puts it above our basic edits layer. And we can see the difference here if I turn off the edits that we made and turn them back on. So it did take that extra dark area here in that preset out, and it evened up that bright area there on her cheek as well. So applying those edits first can really make a difference when you're editing your images, or when you're applying conversion to black and white. Okay, so that just gives you an idea as to what that applying some presets before you actually apply your look can do to make those presets work that much easier for you. It's going to take a lot of work out of out of the end of it. Okay, so we can always adjust these presets as much as we want. So I'm going to zoom in here on the face. Now, this highlight here on the lip to me doesn't look super white. This looks a little gray. This one in her eye, it's pretty close to white. I bet if I looked at the histogram that I don't really have any tones that are really, really bright here in the whites. So tell you what I'll do. I'm going to punch up the whites slider to brighten that up just a touch. Not too much, that was way too much. Just a little bit to brighten that up. And actually, that looks, I can see it right here in the lip, and I can see it on her eye, and her eyes are really white and bright now. So now I'm going to even take the highlights down ski just a little bit too. So that's just creating a little bit more contrast in the highlight area here. So a little brighter on the whites, a little darker on the highlights. That looks good. Okay, there we go. So that was easy. We applied the preset. No, we applied basic edits, we put our preset on, and we made a little bit of a tweak. Pretty much good to go. This image looks great like this. All right. Now, let's talk about how to make some refinements to like the tones inside the image, because that's really where you're doing the conversion yourself, is where you control those tones. Okay, so we're going to look at another image here. This one is Zoe. Okay, so right off the bat, remember that we were just looking at images that Barbara had finished that looked good to go as JPEGs that she could post, like this. This image right here, you can see the skin tones of this woman, little girl. They're really pretty. You can see that she had, she looks like her skin is made of porcelain. She has a nice area where it's bright here on her cheek, right there. You have some nice shadow tones comes down. Looks really, really good. This image has a little bit of that going on, but not quite as much. And that's because Barbara planned to make this one black and white. See, it's not just me. Other people do it too. Okay, anyway, so now let's adjust this one in a different sense than we did the first one. The first one, we applied some basic edits to get it to a place where it was neutral before we applied our preset. Well, guess what? This one right here already looks neutral, so we can just apply our preset. Makes it easy. All right. So, okay, yes, let's look at this. I'm going to close the histogram. This is a really good example image. Okay, so we have our AGFA presets. Now look at this model skin, okay? Totally perfect, totally perfect, totally perfect, right? A little bit brighter, a little bit darker. That's what happens between these film stocks. They just have a little bit of a different feel. Down on the bottom here are a different family of films. Kodak Portra or Kodak Tri-X. Okay, so Kodak Tri-X has a lot of a different way that it applies to those skin tones. So this is Tri-X 400. This is Tri-X 400 with a push. And here it is pushed even further. Now look at how much mood this image has right now with that extra pushed. It's 2 stops pushed actually being added here. So pushed is actually a film term, okay? So I do like how moody this is, but I like how smooth her skin looks in these presets up here. Now, I want you to notice again, I'm going to highlight this. You can see on her skin with this darker preset that we have some texture on that skin, okay? Now, this model has perfect skin in the first place, so we don't really need to worry about adding a little bit of texture, but we do kind of need to not add too much texture because, you know, it can make people look prematurely aged. It can make the skin look a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to say messy, but it's not making them look as great as they could had we not done that with the skin. So because she has such perfect skin in the first place, I think we can get away with adding a little bit of texture, which might make her look a little bit more, I don't know, human. Anyway, let's take a look. I'll show you what I mean. So that pushed processing that I just mentioned is actually on the grain tab. So I'm going to select, I'll do Agfa 25, APX 25 again. And that's it. I'm going to close this panel. Oop. Now, okay, so now we've converted it, and now we'll go to the grain tab. Just like I said, on the grain tab, you can see type. This is the control. This controls the grain. Okay, so the push processing slider, essentially what that does is it's going to increase the contrast in the image and it increases the grain. Okay, it increases the appearance of grain, but you can see how it grabs that and adds that contrast to it. Okay, now I really like grain in my portrait images. Okay, but I won't add that until after I have everything else settled in. So, but I do want to add this contrast now because that grain is something that I will touch more at the end when I add sharpening. We'll show you in just a second. So I'm going to push it a little bit, not quite a full stop. Let's say like that. Looks pretty good. Okay. So now we have our APX preset applied and we added that extra contrast. Okay. Now, after we add that extra contrast, so the darker of tones and the stronger contrast in the face can pronounce that texture, which is what we're trying to add with a little bit of that extra contrast there. So now what we can do is control these colors individually with the controls on the color panel, which in color, these are the hue, saturation, and luminance controls. However, because we are editing a black and white image, you can see right here we're in black and white mode. You see how it's highlighted blue? Because we're working on a black and white image, these are now color sensitivity sliders. And just along with anything in exposure, there are plenty of presets that you can select from that will apply different presets to this image. What we have right now has the Agfa APX style applied to it. This is how the Agfa APX color sensitivity looks. So let's, instead of dragging and highlighting and brightening each one of these tones individually on this image, we can use the color selection tool to grab and adjust specific regions in the photo. So typically, let's look at this one thing at a time here. So reds, when you think about skin, inside of skin, red, there's a red coloring in all types of skin, regardless of complexion. So that's the primary tone that you're going to find in skin tones, right? So if I drag the red sensitivity slider to brighten the skin tones, because I just want to add just a little bit of punch to her face, look what happens. Okay, I'm going to add a lot of punch so you can really see what happens. Okay, so see how her skin becomes like glowy, really clean, like she's a ghost. Also, her lip gets really, really bright, and that kind of looks a little weird. Okay? But you see how it did that? That's a really quick trick if you want to make skin look bright and healthy. You just grab the red slider in black and white, grab the red sensitivity slider, you drag it a little bit higher or a little bit up, and the skin gets a little bit clearer and cleaner. So we added a little bit of texture by pushing this image, but then we removed it a little bit with this red sensitivity slider, okay? So you can do some back and forth like that if you choose to. Now, I'm not concerned with the skin because it's perfect, right? So I'm just going to set that back down to 0 because I like how dark the lip is. So let's go back to this color selector tool. We'll select on that and then grab the skin, and then we'll drag it up to brighten it. Now you can see that in the skin, in her skin in particular, she has a lot of oranges and yellows. If you can see as I drag the slider, or as I drag up and down in the preview, the sliders, the oranges and yellows sliders, are changing. So that's a great way to separate from, what you actually want to select. Like, I didn't want these lips to be, glowy, but I did want the skin to get a little bit more bright. I do like this contrast here, but I want this part of the skin in particular to be bright on her face. So I can just adjust it just like that, and then click to get back out of that tool. Okay. Now, yeah, sometimes you need to adjust each zone in particular on its own. So like if I'm not happy with the way the lip looks right here, it's going to have more than just the red in it. So I can use the same technique that I use to brighten the skin to grab a hold of the lip and then make that even darker. But you can see that it does apply more it does edit these skin tones as well, not just the lip. Okay, has a little magenta in it if you don't see that moving. Okay, great. So now let's get some more detailed adjustments. We really have this look dialed in at this point. I think it's getting really tight. I like how dark it is right here. Oh my gosh, that's my favorite. It looks good, but I can still see detail in all of this work. Okay. Yes, details. Okay, I'm going to close the color panel. Now, remember when I said I was going to add some sharpening later? Now's the time. Sharpening and grain are something that I would add at this point in the workflow. Black and white images, typically I apply sharpening at the beginning of the workflow. Before I even begin or touch processing, I'll add some sharpening because it's like, think of it as you're making, you're fixing an issue with the image, right? So if the image is a little bit out of focus, or if it's a little soft, then you can add a little bit of sharpening at the beginning, make it look crisp and good, and then edit right to that. Okay. However, black and white images, because you're making adjustments to the colors themselves, they're going to receive the effects of sharpening differently than in color. So the absolute best way to do it is to wait until the end of the workflow. Now, I know that everybody has a way of doing things, but I'm just going to do it this way, so bear with me. Okay, I'm going to add a new layer for these sharpening effects because I'm also going to be adding grain effects. Okay, so yeah. So let's zoom in because when we're adding sharpening, we want to zoom in. Now, this is where I wanted to point out a little bit of something with this image. We can see that the focus was grabbed on her rear eye. And this is, I used to shoot weddings, and so I had this happen pretty much every time because it's really hard. People are moving around all the time. Anyway, very common. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply sharpening to the front eye here. Only the eye. I just want to bring that into focus so it's nice and crisp. And back here where it's already been sharp, or it's already sharp, I don't need to really do anything. So what I'm going to do is only concentrate on this front eye when I apply my adjustments. Now, there's a couple of ways to do it. I can apply my sharpening right now, and it will be applied to the whole image, or I can mask the area that I want to apply that effect. So I'm going to click the thumbnail, or the, mask thumbnail, and then use my brush and just brush in where I want that effect to go. And I want it to be right there on her eye. I really don't want to get underneath her eye here, so I'm going to hit the eraser, that's Alt on the keyboard, and get rid of that extra. I don't want it to accidentally poke that. Now it's giving me a prompt that says you're not doing anything, right? You're using an empty brush. Well, I know that because I want to add sharpening. Okay, so actually I don't even need to do it here. So now I have my layer with a mask that's just right on her eye. You can see it right there. And I'm going to add sharpening on that. So I close the brush tool, and then I will add my sharpening. Right? So now you can see I just cranked it all the way up, and you can see that I've already applied some sharpening here, and it's already evened out these two things, right? I'm going to hold down the Alt key. That's the way to apply or to preview these, the effects of these sliders on the image as you make adjustments. And I'll dial it in, hold down Alt again, and make the mask down. So I'm just hitting those edges. Hey, you want to see something cool? When you do this masking, it actually shows you where there's been retouching. Anyway, still porcelain skin. Okay, cool. So I'm going to crank the detail up in this one because there is some extra little bits of grain and stuff that I want to pull out of that. Now it's way, way, way too strong, guys. Don't judge. There we go. Much better. Okay, so that added just a little bit of clarity to that front eye. Now it more matches this one in the back. It'll really, really grab your eye when you're looking at this, especially if it's printed. So another thing to point out here is that if you're not going to print this image out, you don't need to edit it when you're zoomed in so close. If you're only going to print this to Instagram, there's no reason for you to look at, a 5,000 pixel wide image. You only need, 1080. Anyway, okay, so let's add some finishing touches right now to this image, and we'll be all done. Okay. So often when you're dialing a black and white portrait in, for me, as a final step, I like to set it off with a little bit of dodge and burn. Burning can be a simple process like adding a vignette. So let me show you. Since burning is the process of darkening, right? If I add a vignette, then you can see right there, I just burned in the edges. So that would be burning, right? Or I can do the opposite of that, where I would apply dodging or lightning to like the face, because I want the emphasis to be on the face, right? So an easy way to do, well, if I did the painting on, or if I did the dodging, then I have a little bit more control rather than just applying that vignette, but it's kind of the same principle. So there's a couple of ways to do it. I am going to use the brush tool. I have an empty layer, and I'll choose the dodge preset, okay? So now this is where I think it's really fun. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of little tiny areas here on the face where I want to see a little bit more detail because I think it'll be more grabbing to your attention. Okay, so with my brush set at pretty low flow, it doesn't need to be hard, or it doesn't need to be like super strong. I'm going to paint right on the eyes to brighten them up. Okay, and then I know it's fake. It looks really fake right now, but it's good that you can see where the effect is, okay? So you can see her eyes are glowing like they have spotlights on them individually, right? I'm also going to do a little bit here underneath this nose. She has a really cute button nose, so I'm going to add that just like this. And then I want to put a little bit of emphasis on the bottom of her chin, on the ball right here, to add to that contrast between her chin underneath here where it's dark and her chin up here where it's bright. The reason to do that is that there's a lot of power in the edge of that chin. So in a portrait, I want that to read really clear. Now I'm going to also strengthen that highlight there on her jawbone, and then I'll give her a little bit of a spot there on her forehead, okay? So there, it's totally creamed. This is way, way, way too bright, but we can see that I'm adding a little bit of finishing to this face so that it's really about the face. Okay, so don't judge me right now. I'm going to fix it. Okay, right. So we have it set to the dodge layer, right? I'm going to turn off my or close the brush tool, and then let's look at the basic panel. Our dodge layer has a couple of, one edit on it. Exposure goes up to 2 stops. Now, I don't want the edit that I make here to stick out from the image as much as this exposure 2 stops does. So I'm going to take this down a little bit. What I want to do is create a little bit more emphasis on her eyes and the areas that I highlighted, which are mostly in the brighter tones in the image. So what I'm going to do, I raise the exposure just a little bit on those areas. I'm going to lower the highlights a little bit. You've seen me do this. And I'm going to raise the whites a little bit, and you can see what happens there. Now you can see, remember when I pointed out that porcelain look on those skin tones in that other image, that Barbara's, that's really, really gorgeous? Well, that's kind of what I'm doing right here with this, is I'm bringing the highlights down a little bit, which instead of bringing them up, which would flatten out those white areas, I want to bring them just a little bit down. And then in the whites, I bring those just a little bit up, and then you can see where that porcelain sheen starts to come through. Now, that's just a few edits that I made on that layer. I still have control to make that layer and the effects of that layer strong or not very strong. But I do like the look of that. I think that it adds to the image. Cool. One last thing, and we are all done. On this layer, layer 3, this was our sharpening. No. Oh, that's an empty layer. I messed up right there, guys. There's nothing on that layer, is there? Nothing. What I was going to put on this layer was grain. So I'm going to do that really quick because it's super easy. Now remember how I adjusted the contrast of the grain, what was it, push processing down here? You can see that? I don't need to adjust that here because it's already been adjusted. All I'm going to do is just choose a nice gentle grain, just like that. And we can see that it's been applied to that image and it looks so good on that skin. Wow. Okay. So I'm going to rename this to this just so that I know what I did. Okay, well, so now I think that we've pretty much done, we're to the end of our demonstration. I think that we made some good progress today. So yeah, let me give you guys a couple of comments and then we can address some questions. Hopefully my microphone is not continually going in and out the entire time. So yeah, if you want to get in contact with other exposure users, the best place to do that would be our Facebook group, the Exposure Users Facebook group. If you want to share your work with us and other exposure users, we encourage you to do so. To do that, we ask that you go over to Instagram and use our hashtag #MyExposureEdit. So we want to thank you for your interest in exposure and for tuning in today. Let's turn it over to some questions. So if you guys have anything burning in the back of your minds that you want to ask, go ahead and pipe up. Well, okay. So we actually have a video on our website that talks specifically about the different types and applications of sharpening and exposure. So we go over import sharpening, or when you come to exposure, just like we did here, to kind of fix the image, add a little tiny bit of sharpening there. There's another type of sharpening and exposure too. I'm going to add another layer. Okay, so the first round of sharpening, I'll just illustrate for everybody. First round of sharpening happens here on the sharpening panel. That is where you're making adjustments to make, thank you for that link, Nate. This is where you add sharpening. You can add, this is for correcting issues like what we did in this image. So where we have maybe a little bit of softness or something like that, that's where these controls on this panel work, right? Now, if you want to take it up another notch, then you can come down to the focus panel, which also has some sharpening controls. Now I'll show you here. If I cream the sharpening on this one and drag it all the way over, you can see how aggressive the sharpening is, right? Super aggressive. This looks like Facebook sharpening. I didn't say that. Anyway, so yeah, these sharpening controls are way, way stronger if you're going to do a creative type effect, or let's say that you're doing something on a landscape, or you need some grit or something like that. Here's where you would do something like that, is apply it on the focus panel. The third place that you can apply sharpening is when you're exporting your images or when you're going to print. So if I bring up the print properties dialog here, I hit Control P, then at the bottom down out here is my output sharpening, and this is where I can apply sharpening for ink diffusion on paper, which happens when you put, dot matrix printers and they kind of smear around a little bit. So you add a little bit of sharpening as it's going to the printer to add a little bit there. So those are your three types of sharpening that you can do in exposure, but I really do encourage you to check out the other video just because there's a lot there. Does the video show the amount of sharpening with the grayed out? Yeah, Yes and no. It's not the amount of sharpening. When I hold down the Alt key, I think that's what you're referring to. So if I turn the amount all the way over, that just applies it as strong as it can be. But the control is where I'm controlling how wide the effect is with the radius slider. So that is how from one pixel to the next, how far out we're reaching, right? So this goes up to 5 as a radius. And then the masking tells us what level of brightness those edges, or what amount of contrast the edges need to get or need to have in order to be selected for those sharpening effects. And that's what we're controlling with this masking slider. And so if you hold down the Alt key, then when you have enough contrast in an edge, that's what's actually being sharpened. That's where the sharpening effect is being applied. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. All right, excellent. So you guys are the best. I'm just going to say that. This has been my favorite demo. Barbara, thanks so much again for the images and for tuning in today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one of these videos that we have, or webinars. Everybody, we love you. And everybody stay safe, and we will see you next time.